Hello and welcome to Cards and Coffee. Today we're looking at Mono Black Devotion for Modern. This deck's main goal is to get a bunch of permanents with black symbols onto the battlefield and finish the game with our value creatures, all while depriving our opponent of theirs. We have plenty of removal alongside of Black Devotion. We don't care whatever our opponent puts on the battlefield, we want to kill it. I'll be using TCG Player for pricing. Let's jump right in. Starting off with our creatures, we have 4 copies of Gatekeeper of Malakir. This creature gives us 2 devotion, and if we pay the kicker cost, our opponent sacrifices a creature. Spoiler alert, we will always pay the kicker cost. So our opponent sacrifices a creature, we get a 2/2 body, and 2 black mana to our devotion. If played correctly, this creature often kills our opponent's only creature on the battlefield, getting past hexproof or protection from black if they have it. Gifted Aetherborn is a 2 mana 2/3 with lifelink and death touch. We have a full playset. This creature is a great early game attacker and blocker. It has death touch, which guarantees it will take out whatever gets in its way, while also being a powerful blocker. It also has 3 toughness, which can be great in the early game to play defense if we have to. Overall, such a great creature. Our first removal spell is 4 copies of Geth's Verdict. This spell gets around creatures that have indestructible and protection from black, since it doesn't target. The downside of this card is that we don't get to choose which creature is sacrificed, but we usually play this when our opponent only has 1 creature. We have 4 copies of Go for the Throat as our next removal spell. This spell is simple, 2 mana to destroy a non-artifact creature, and that is a wide variety of creatures in Modern. Delver of Secrets, Tarmogoyf, Death Shadow, see you later. In the off chance that our opponent is playing an artifact creature heavy deck, then we can just side this out. More times than not, however, it is a 2 mana destroy target creature. First up in the 3-drop slot is for Geralf's Messenger. This gives us 3 devotion as well as drain our opponent for 2 life. It also has Undying, so when it dies, it comes back into play with a +1/+1 counter on it, and drains our opponent for 2 more life. The downside is that it comes into play tapped, but we'll most likely have had a few Gifted Aetherborn attacks that will have given us some life, so we don't mind not being on the block for a turn. Geralf's Messenger is a solid 3/2 body that provides 3 devotion and drains our opponent for 2. Absolutely a must run in a deck like this. Murderous Rider is up next. We have a full playset. Murderous Rider is a 3 mana 2/3 with lifelink, and when it dies, it goes to the bottom of our library. It can also be played as an adventure that allows us to destroy a creature or planeswalker and lose 2 life. As mentioned earlier, Gifted Aetherborn will give us extra life in the early game, so this doesn't hurt us at all. Murderous Rider also allows us to deal with planeswalkers, something Mono Black usually isn't good at removing. Desecration Demon is a powerhouse in this deck, a 4 mana 6/6 with flying. That's already a beast on its own. However, there is a drawback. If our opponent has a lot of smaller creatures such as tokens, they can keep sacrificing them to keep the demon tapped. They can do this before combat on each player's turn, and if they do, our demon gets tapped, but it gets a +1/+1 counter. He removes creatures all while growing in power. If we're able to wither away our opponent's board state, then eventually they won't have any creatures to sacrifice to the demon, and he'll be a 4 mana 6/6 flying creature. Phyrexian Obliterator is a 4 mana 5/5 with trample that is amazing for black devotion, and is a terrifying creature to be staring down on the battlefield. Whenever this creature is dealt damage, whoever is the source of that damage, our opponent, has to sacrifice that many permanents. This makes burn completely irrelevant against this creature, since they'd have to sacrifice 5 permanents. This creature often isn't blocked, because our opponent will not want to sacrifice permanents, and it's swinging for 5 damage. This creature forces our opponent to answer it, and they have to answer it with hard removal. Burn is completely irrelevant. We have 2 copies of Erebos, God of the Dead. This god is easily a creature in this deck, as it isn't too difficult to acquire 5 devotion to black, especially if he hits the battlefield on turn 4. Our opponents won't be allowed to gain life when he is in play, and we can pay 2 mana and 2 life to draw a card. This is a great mid to late game play when we're running out of gas. Gifted Aetherborn and Murderous Rider will gain us some life back, so spending life to draw cards is absolutely worth it. Our last creature in the deck is Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Good old Gary. If you've ever seen Black Devotion, you knew he was coming. Most of the time, he's our finisher, often winning us the game as soon as he hits the battlefield. By the time Grey Merchant lands, you've probably won, or you're about to. Our mana base is pretty simple. We have 4 copies of Castle Locthwain to start. This land taps for black mana and lets us get some card advantage as well. Yes, we lose some life while doing it, but in the late game when we need extra cards, it'll be worth it. The rest of the mana is 18 swamps. Not much more to say about that. Gotta love monocolored decks, no fetches needed. Let's move on to the sideboard. We have 2 copies of Lifebane Zombie. This creature has Intimidate, and allows us to exile a green or white creature in our opponent's hand that could give us some problems. While our sacrifice abilities can get past protection, having the extra ability to get rid of something that may have protection from black is always nice. It's always nice to be able to deal with something before it hits the battlefield. 4 copies of Feed the Swarm is next. Black usually doesn't have a lot of ways to get rid of enchantments, so this card is a great sideboard option. Remember, life is a resource and we don't mind spending it to get rid of our opponent's threats. We have 2 copies of Drown in Sorrow. This allows us to clear the battlefield if our opponent is playing a lot of smaller creatures such as tokens or elves. 2 copies of Leyline of the Void. This allows us to shut down our opponent's deck if they are playing using their graveyard. 2 copies of Bile Blight will kill most early game creatures and will severely punish our opponent if they are playing multiple copies of the same one. It also gets past Indestructible, which is nice. 3 copies of Duress. You can run Thoughtseize in its place if you'd like to, but I don't think it's necessary, because whatever creature hits the battlefield, we can usually deal with it. Duress allows us to get rid of troublesome cards that we might not be able to deal with, such as artifacts like Chalice of the Void. And that's Mono Black Devotion. Let me know what you think of it. The idea is simple. Play a bunch of black permanents and kill a bunch of our opponent's stuff. What's not to love? Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.